I'm State Senator Robert Jackson, and this is Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, commonly is called MNN. So today we want to talk about the electoral process that we are currently living in right now. Obviously, we want to talk about early voting, and then move right into where we stand right now. And our guest today on Represent NYC is Rev Dr Damaris, who is the pastor of the Fort Collegiate Church on 181st Street and Fort Washington Avenue. She also is a constituent of ours in the 31st Senatorial District, and Richie Fife, commonly known as Richie Fife. And Richie Fife is a consultant, but he also lives on the Upper West Side, not in my district, but in another district. But it's all good because you know one thing, we're all New Yorkers and we're representing NYC. So with that, what I want to talk about is, tell me from your experience, and I have my own experiences, as far as the first time ever in New York State where we're having early voting for a presidential election. And as you know, 6 months ago, about June and primaries, we had early voting, but it was not as massive, as humongous as it was this time around. And so early voting for me was just a huge experience, understanding that lines were all the way around the corner, sometimes twice or all the way around. So let me turn to Reverend Dr. Damaris. Tell me about your experience as far as early voting, what you saw, what you experienced, if you voted. I voted early voting myself, but what about you? And then we turn to Richie Fife.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rev Dr Damaris Whittaker, and as the senator said, I am the senior minister of Fort Washington Collegiate Church. And I think that most of our constituents in our congregation and around my neighbors here in Washington Heights, a great number of them went and did early voting at various times. Even as of last Sunday, I was giving communion on the steps of the church, and people came and stopped by who were not even members of the congregation to get communion because they were just coming back from early voting. I also think that, this whole, mailing your vote process, it was new. We heard a lot of negative rhetoric around it, and yet a lot of people still went and they casted their vote through mail. I also want to say that I was a person who voted in person because Fort Washington Collegiate Church is a polling site. And I wanted, I have access to the building, so I was there before 6 to make sure things were in order and that everything was going smoothly for the election process. And I voted in person because I was there, making sure that my staff was supported and that everything was going well for the Board of Elections. So I also want to say that this election process, while it was new, we've never had this turnout, right, of early voters before. It was surprising in many ways of how many people of color voted early. And there is a distinction that needs to be made there in communities where, there's a lot of voting suppression, where we feel that standing in lines hit a certain place in our existence and in our history as people of color. So I'm very proud of all the people that voted early. And I'm also very proud of those. When I went to our church on voting day, I was there a few minutes before 6 or maybe 15 minutes before 6 to make sure things were going well before we opened the doors. And there was already a line around the corner of our building. So we were very proud that people were so engaged in this election process.
Well, thank you for exercising your right to vote in person. And obviously, there's been discussions all in the media about early voting and that Democrats are more voting early, and our President Donald Trump is telling the Republicans to go on election day and vote. So you have all of this swinging one way and the other. And I noticed that that many of the people that were voting early obviously were voting early, but then some people on election day, I saw them with their wheelchairs and their walkers and their canes. And these are some individuals, older ones, that could not go the distance to the early voting locations. So they took advantage of it on election day, and I saw that up in Inwood. Let me turn to Richie Fife. Richie, from a consultant's point of view, what did you think about that process? And did you vote early or did you vote in person?
I voted early. I think I think for too long, New York has had laws that suppress the vote, made it hard to vote. And I think anything that makes it easier to vote, that makes more people participate is good. And it took, frankly, it was the state Senate had held up reform laws forever. And it took turning the state Senate, put in Democratic control, and you and Zelnor Myrie as head of the elections committee, and the force of the new energy of and the new Democratic leadership to pass laws like early voting. You know, I did an election 35 years ago in Austin, Texas. I advised the candidate, and they had early voting then. And it was like an amazing thing to me. You said, oh, you can vote 2 weeks before the election. And down in Texas, they had polling places in malls and libraries and made it convenient. And I think bringing it to New York both makes it easier for people to vote. It eases some of the pressure on election day, and is a big step forward. I think, you know, with the history, I think the Board of Elections, which gets a lot of attacks, should be complimented that it ran smoothly. I think there was a lot of poll helpers and poll workers that were trained and were smiling and helpful doing that. I think where they could have done better is that there need to be more sites. 82 sites to replace the 1,200 we have in New York City on election day weren't enough, and that's where we had the lines. But I think getting there, they learn, we learn, and more people learn, I think is a good thing for democracy. Well,
I think that based on this election process, people said, you hear some people said, vote like your life depended upon it, you know, because of the fact that obviously Donald Trump is our president, and you know, on Twitter and other things that he communicates with, you know, they're saying this has not been verified as the truth, you know. So in essence, people think that he's lying, and you know, coronavirus is turning the curve, when in reality around the world it's increasing. So obviously this was an extremely important vote overall for the presidency of the United States. So with that said, can you transition to currently where we are right now? You know, what we've said, and I've said even myself, make a plan. What day are you going to vote? What's the weather going to be like? And all of the considerations in order to vote. And so myself, when it was raining outside, and it rained several days overall, and obviously that had an impact on people coming out. And I said to myself, I was going to the airport, I think on a Thursday, and I said, let me go by my voting place, the Armory on 168th Street of Manhattan, and let me see if there's a line. If there's no line, I'm gonna park the car and then go in. And I drove by there, and there was no line. And I parked 3 blocks away, and I ran there and I voted, and I got to the airport to pick up my family. So it was making a plan. And you, as you know, the people of our state had 3 different ways. One, they can vote by absentee ballot. Number 2, they could early vote. And number 3, they can go in on election day. And for me, it was important to vote in person. And as you know, so in the June primary, people had absentee ballots, and with the legitimate excuse of COVID-19, but they didn't have to put a stamp on it. And now with absentee ballots, they have to put a stamp on it. So did they have to put 1 stamp or 2 stamps, depending on, because it was the ballot, the envelope, the outside envelope, and another envelope. And so to be absolutely sure, I wanted to vote in person. That's why I had a sticker saying I voted early. But where are we right now? I know that everyone, I believe everyone, or 99% of the people are watching the results. Tell me where we stand now. What do you think is happening?
You know, it's so interesting that you asked me that question. I'm going to answer that question from the perspective of our moral dilemma.
Okay.
Here in this country, we have spent 4 years, and I'm going to speak from the perspective, I don't speak for all people of color, and I don't speak for all Puerto Ricans or Black Puerto Ricans. From the perspective, from the Latino perspective, from this Latina that I, you know, who I am, who's also Black, you know, it has been 4 years of oppression. It has been 4 years of dismantling the rights of people of color. It has been 4 years of, you know, taking out DACA and everything that has to do with immigration being dismantled, of a rhetoric of building walls, of a rhetoric of taking LGBTQ people's rights away and women's rights. It's been 4 years of saying to people of color, to people who are LGBTQI+, to women, you don't matter to me. You don't matter to us. We don't see you. Your inherent value is being denied every step of the way. And so we are here in this moral dilemma in this country, watching an election minute by minute. I don't know about you, I go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning every night since the election, because I'm watching here and I'm watching in Puerto Rico. And I feel like morally and spiritually, we should not be here if we loved our neighbor as we loved ourselves. We should not be in this position at this moment, but we are. And what is the message that we are receiving for our communities here in Washington Heights, for our communities around the world, is that, you know, the issue of we have not resolved and we will not resolve our DNA and what comes from this white nationalism history in our country. We have not resolved the issue of race. We have not resolved the issue of inequality. Because if we did, we would not be here. We would not, you know, Philadelphia would not be where it is. We would not be, you know, Arizona will have declared already. What happened in Florida. And we're going to talk about, you know, we don't have time, but, you know, when we look at the Latino vote, that's another program. When we look at the Latino vote and what is internalized oppression and white supremacy and how it just sneaks into so many other groups, that's where we are in our moral dilemma. And when we have an evangelical right that claims God for the exclusion and oppression of other God, you know, others who are children of God. You know, I just want to say, as a Christian woman, as a woman of faith, that message is not mine. We are all God's children. We are all made in God's image, and the evangelical right does not hold the throne of God for the rest of us, and they don't speak for the rest of us. So I disavow what Paula White is saying and what everyone else is saying on behalf of Christianity. So we are in a moral crisis. This is what we're looking at here. Is we're looking at a nation that has said we're better than this, and we are in this question of, are we better than this or are we this?
So Richie, before you comment, I want to read to everyone, and especially the audience that's watching. I tweeted about 5 hours ago. Says, how do you spell democracy? And then you look it up and they pronounce it in a dictionary, obviously democracy, a system of government by the whole population of all eligible members. It goes on a little bit more, but that's the most important part. And so I say, so we wait patiently. And then I give the definition of patiently and how it's pronounced. And now I'm going to move my car before I get a ticket and jog 4 miles. Enjoy waiting. So Richie Fife, tell me, where are we right now? Should we be enjoy waiting, or should we be holding our breath and clenching our fists? For me, as you can see, the audience can see, I have a shirt on that promotes peace worldwide. And obviously we're all sisters and brothers of the human race. And so I'm trying to promote peace and not get people excited where they're picking up guns and or sticks or whatever and fighting one another, because that's not what it's about. Richie, give me your opinion.
I think that's right. I think on one side, we both have to wait kind of patiently for the process to work out, and the process is working out just like people said it was going to work out before it started, that in some places it takes longer to count the ballots. In New York, that doesn't matter in the presidential, but by law, you're not allowed to start counting the ballots till next week. And I think one has to wait for democracy to play out on that one. I think at the same time, as you're being patient, relaxing, I think it's also important that people stay involved. I think they can't kind of go asleep on democracy and let others put pressure on for their own ends, or to stop the counting, or to do anything. But more in the big picture, and getting back to what the Reverend said, you know, we can't be content that if we defeat Trump after this process, which it looks like we have, and I think it's obviously reassuring to all of us that we do, that the job is done, because democracy keeps going. And next year, basically we have elect a whole new city government, and the people has to stay involved and stay vigilant and look for candidates. And, you know, from the 10 or so candidates who are now running for mayor to controller to almost all the city council seats are open with a lot of new young energy and new people who could make real change in Manhattan. You know, there's a DA's race, as you know, Robert, that I'm working with Alvin Bragg, who's I think a great candidate, but people have to stay vigilant and involved in democracy, and that's how it works best.
Well, you know, Richie, I agree with you. And also next year and in the city of New York, you're going to have ranked voting. And so many people don't know and have not experienced ranked voting, where if there are 5 candidates running, you can rank them, your top priority, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can just rank 1 and you don't have to put the rest. And obviously that's what's going to happen in New York. So it's going to be pretty interesting. And in that respect, I think that ranked voting brings about the type of relationship that you have to build, because if in fact you're number 1 and you know that somebody may go out first, you try to partner with them and have an agreement with them. So if in fact they go out, if they're carrying you number 2 on their card, then you will get their votes in order to try to reach 50% plus 1. So we're going to have to educate the populace about ranked voting in this process. And as you know, in 2024, New York State will have public financing of electoral process. And as you know, and Dr. Whittaker, that the whole situation as far as there are 8 parties in New York State in which basically each party had to get a minimum of 130,000 votes or 2%, whichever is higher, to remain a party. And so there's some people, in my opinion, that want to get rid of all parties except their parties. So quickly for the audience, we have 8 parties. We have Democratic Party, Republican Party, Conservative Party, Working Families Party, Green Party, Independence Party, SAM Party, and I think Libertarian Party. And so if you don't reach a minimum of 130,000 votes or 2%, whichever is higher, and I believe it's 2%, then you will no longer be a registered party in the state of New York. And so some people would say, wait a minute, there's only 3 parties that have reached that threshold before, and that is the Democratic Party, Republican, and the Conservative Party. And in New York State, we have a system called fusion. So whereas if the Working Families Party, which is the row D, and the Democratic Party, they have the same candidates, Biden, Harris, they fuse their votes together as one. And the Republican and Conservative Party, they have Donald Trump, and they fuse their votes together. And so educating people about fusion voting in New York State is a process in itself. So what's your opinion about the fact that fusion voting and the minimum of 130,000 votes or 2%, whichever is higher, in order to eliminate, in my opinion, eliminate some of these parties that don't get that much. And before, all you had to do was get 50,000 votes on the governor's line. And now you have to get 130 or 2%, whichever is higher, every 2 years. What's your opinion about that, Reverend?
I struggle with statements like Party X and Party Y, they splitted the vote, right? I struggle with those statements because I think that if the people should be given the choice to vote for who they want. And the more we can facilitate spaces for their voices to be heard according to their beliefs, the better we are. I'm not saying that we should have 50 parties. I'm just saying that we continue to, in my opinion, as a minister, we continue to suppress the minority people, right? We continue to blend them in so that we can put them in a box that makes everybody comfortable. And I just think that we need to look at that more closely, that we should be more thoughtful about it. And that we need to, if we look at 2 parties and we conclude, oh, they splitted the vote because we wouldn't have them, this other person would have won. We're not really doing our job to reach out to our constituencies. We're really not doing our job to reach out to those who feel marginalized, which is really what has happened in the Latino vote, to be really honest. We're here in the United States, people have put Latinos in one box and thinking that we're a monolithic group, and then they're surprised. But I don't know that fusing is if we're going to fusing, we need to be thoughtful about that. And we need to pay more attention to our constituencies and really instead of creating less spaces for people to vote, let's be committed to give people more choices.
And I could, you know what I call that? I call that democracy in action. That's democracy. Don't reduce us down to Republican and Democrat. Reduce us to being inclusive of everyone. And that's why I have put forward a bill in the New York State Assembly to try to move it back to 50,000 votes every 2 years. That's democracy in action. Richie Fife, do you agree with that? Or you're a Democrat? I consider myself a working families Democrat. So tell me about the whole issue of that, and where do we stand right now with respects to what they're saying on CNN and New York One, ABC, and no matter what station you watch, they're talking about the swing states.
First, on the Working Families Party, I think what we saw on Election Day was a great support for their message and the progressive message that kept them on the ballot. But I think at the same time, it was a great waste of money and effort that they had to defend themselves from this kind of attack from the governor. And that manpower, those volunteer hours, the money they put in could have been used to sending people down to Pennsylvania and to making sure that we carried it, not by the small margin that looks like we're going to, but by a bigger margin that was more comfortable. Those same money and manpower could have been used on state Senate seats to get a supermajority in the state Senate to move a progressive message. And so the kind of political attack they had to defend themselves from, and they showed the strength of their message by the vote they got, but was also could have been used for better purposes without that. I think, you know, going back to the national level, you'll have pundits saying every which side of it is, and what we have is a very divided country, and it's divided pretty much 50-50. And I think in some ways the vote kind of ignored some of the personalities and who the candidates were, and people felt they had to retreat to their team. I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, and it comes back to this 50-50 in terms of at least how the Electoral College counts votes. I mean, I think you'll see the popular vote, the margin is already larger than Hillary Clinton won, and I think it's by the time New York's counted, by the time California's counted, you'll see a 6-7 million popular vote advantage for Biden. But I think, you know, it's important that we get beyond some of the political attacks that came after the Working Families Party and start working on the agenda to make lives better for people and make government work for all of us.
So let me talk about New York State. Obviously, you know, we have a majority in the New York State Senate right now. We have 40. And our goal was to try to reach a supermajority of at least 42, realistically 44, 45. But you and I know that we've heard over the past couple of weeks that people like Ron Lauder has pumped several millions of dollars, and others, wealthy New Yorkers or people, in order to try to turn and flip, especially Long Island, about 5 seats that were won 2 years ago to give a Democratic majority, trying to flip it back to Republican, and upstate also. So my understanding, there's about 36 Democrats that are definitely coming back, and there's 8 seats which are flippable. And so we're hoping to get back to 40 and 42. Can you express your opinion about that, if you have, as far as pumping in millions of dollars into these local Senate races? And then I'll turn to you, Dr. Whittaker. Richie.
Yeah, you know, I mean, one thing that's interesting, because we always looked, and over time, history says the off-year election was worse for the Democrats, and the presidential year was better because we have a larger turnout and more people participating, which is generally good for Democrats. I mean, obviously, when you have one side that puts in $5-7 million or whatever the number ended up being into these local races in small districts, it has an influence on it. And I think, you know, we have to look, you know, at the districts and what needs to be done to win. But I think as we wait for the absentee ballots to be counted next week, hopefully some of them kind of come back, and then forge ahead and move forward on the issues that are important to people.
Dr. Whittaker, what about people pumping in millions of dollars into a local Senate race? Now, obviously, you've heard that, and OAC, that they pumped in so much money to try to defeat her, to knock her out of the Congress. And in fact, most people knew that was not going to happen, but they put so much money into that race. And like Richie said, millions of dollars in local Senate races. So what's your opinion about that? And you get this comment.
So what I have to say about that is that I wish we changed our business model of elections. I wish that we pump millions of dollars into our community so that people can have opportunities for economic development, for affordable housing, for a sustainable, affordable, and accessible healthcare, for education where our children do not have to be wondering where the money's going to come for them to buy a book or to have access to quality education. If we pump the same kind of money in serving the people, we will get the votes. But we choose to put money on other things, and our people are still starving. People cannot afford to live in Washington Heights. Our kids are wondering what's going to happen with their education. So for me, we need to change our business model, a model that has moral ethics and that really serves the people. And I'm just going to finish this. Look at the Lincoln Project.
Well, let me just say, I hear you. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. So I'm going to give both of you about 30 seconds to give our final comments. And let's start with you, Dr. Whittaker.
Let us continue to work, regardless of who wins this election, for justice and peace. Let us remember that the systems of oppression are not dismantled because our candidate is in the White House. And so our call for us is to really continue to work together as if our lives depend on it, just like we said about this election, because it does. And until we do that, until we say, you know, the person in the White House will not determine the future of our communities, we will not move from this position. So I'm sending you blessings.
Thank you, Richie. You got 20 seconds, Richie.
Well, I just say that people should stay involved in government, of telling their legislators what they want and their needs, but also stay involved in the democracy of paying attention to local races, because the local races are really what affect their lives.
I was jogging and I saw an American flag up in the distance in the park with all of the trees. And I said, democracy wins. Dr. Whittaker, Richie Fife, thank you for coming on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Represent NYC.